Today marks the third anniversary of the death of Mahsa Amini, the 22-year-old who died in custody of the so-called morality police in Iran. She was arrested for allegedly violating mandatory hijab rules. Her death sparked widespread protest, a mass movement in fact, as Iranians took to the streets to demand freedom. Iranian authorities arrested thousands of them and killed over 500. Today, 3 years on, we look at what remains of that movement and what freedoms have been won or lost. To get more insight, we can speak to co-founder of the Iran Human Rights Organization, a non-governmental organization active in protecting and promoting human rights there, Mr. Mahmood Amiry-Moghaddam. Thanks for your time. Well, can I start simply by asking you that what has changed in the 3 years when it comes to freedoms in Iran?
Well, good morning. I think that the woman life freedom movement was a turning point where all Iranians, regardless of gender, ethnicity, stood side by side and wanted fundamental changes. Although the regime managed to suppress them by using intensive violence, but today we can see that the Iranian society never went back to the time before Gina Mahsa's death. So what we see is that the movement is still going on. For example, when it comes to compulsory hijab, the regime never managed to reinstall the fear that they used to have before. There are many women in Iran that challenge this law, show their civil disobedience every day. And then the regime has become weaker and weaker since then. So I think that the movement is gone, and it's a question of time when the next nationwide protest will be.
Yeah, I believe smaller protests have continued throughout the 3 years and that ongoing defiance, despite what I'm also reading about an increase in technology surveillance, an increase in anti-vigilantes also watching people and reporting them. Is that the case?
Yeah, it is the case. So the Iranian regime has done whatever it takes in order to reinstall the control, but they haven't managed. So one thing is, of course, the technological means that they have been using. The other one is the extreme use of the death penalty to create fear in the society. Today, Iran Human Rights publishes a report showing that in these 3 years, almost 3,000 people have been executed all over Iran. And it happens in all the cities. And, you know, these are not mainly political opponents, but ordinary people for ordinary crimes. But the aim is to instill the fear in the society to prevent more protests.
You also mentioned there that Iran's authorities over the last 3 years aren't in the same position. You know, we saw the bombings by the US and Israel on Iran. What impact did that have both on the authorities and maybe their focus, and also on people in general? I imagine that also took their focus off this protest movement.
Yes, so you see, there are two aspects in that. So the Iranian regime has been incompetent to solve people's daily problems. And this is one of the reasons why people don't want them. But these 12 days war also show that they are even incompetent to protect themselves, not talking about protecting people. You know, Iranians didn't have any shelters. So that's one thing, that they have lost even more legitimacy. But of course, a war always takes the attention, and you know, Iranian people do not want democracy and human rights through bombs and missiles. So the Iranian regime has been trying to use this escalation between Iran and Israel and with the US to suppress even more people inside the country. You know, while every day 4 to 5 people have been executed in Iran, this hasn't received any attention in the international media, in the international community, because all the attention has been on the war and conflict between Iran and Israel. And meanwhile, Iranian regime has focused to suppress more its main enemy. You know, Iranian regime's existential threat comes from young Iranians demanding fundamental changes. It doesn't come from Israel or the US.
Your NGO really focuses on executions in Iran, I understand, and the figures you're bringing us there are quite alarming. You say they're for ordinary crimes. Can you give us more of an idea of what happens and the trials that take place to lead to these executions and how much they're growing?
Yeah, more than 50% of those executed are sentenced to death for drug-related offenses, for possession of drug trafficking. But, they are all arrested without access to lawyer. They are forced to confess under torture, and then eventually they are sentenced to death by the revolutionary courts behind the closed doors. So there is no due process. There is confession based on torture. And what we see is that, the escalation that we see in the executions now, it's unprecedented. At least in the last 30 years, we haven't seen so many executions. As I said, every 6 over 1 person is hanged in Iran. And these people belong to the most marginalized part of the society. Many of them belong to the Baluchi ethnic minorities or other minorities. So they are the low-cost victims of the death penalty policy that has an aim to suppress people, to create fear.
Mahmood Amiry-Moghaddam, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for your time and your insight here on France 24.